Hello and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Black Women's Blueprint and the National Organization for Women. This is our fourth session in our series, 100 Days of a Feminist Agenda, Healing from Centuries of Oppression. This week, our conversation is entitled Gender Equality as the Law of the Land. And as folks continue to join the Zoom, we invite you to let us know in the chat box where you're joining us from. Some basic housekeeping we just wanted to let you know about. We'll be doing our best to keep the conversation to 1 hour. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the hour, and we'd love to hear from you all. Please could you type your questions for our panelists in the Q&A box and use the chat box for comments and reflections. Please know we really are trying our best to get and to answer as many questions as possible, but we're also trying to balance the time we have together. If you've missed any of our previous conversations, which were all outstanding, you can watch them on YouTube on Now's channel. We'll provide links in the chat for each of the previous three, and you can also go to now.org or blackwomensblueprint.org to find links to them. All our events are ASL accessible, and I'd like to thank our ASL translators, Megan Goldberg and Santana Chavez from RGC Access, who are with us today. And with that, I'd like to welcome our moderators, Kathleen Murphy and Dr. Tiffany Dent.
Welcome all. My name is Kathleen Murphy, and I am the Vice President of the Minnesota chapter of NOW.
And my name is Dr. Tiffany Dent. I'm a psychologist and board member of Black Women's Blueprint. I believe Congresswoman Maloney is here, so I wanted to start with her. I'm so excited to introduce Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who has come to say a few words to us. Before representing New York's 17th district in the House, Congresswoman Maloney was a teacher, an education advocate, a state government staffer, and a city councilwoman. Throughout her career, Congresswoman Maloney has used her voice and position to shine a spotlight on the most important issues of our time, from gun control to reproductive health care to LGBTQIA+ rights to, of course, the ERA. She is co-sponsoring HJ Resolution 17, which would eliminate the deadline for ratification of the ERA, and just announced the introduction of another bill, HJ Resolution 28, which would restart the amendment ratification process. Thank you, Congresswoman, for joining us today.
Okay, ready?
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And I am thrilled to be here today with the National Organization for Women and Black Women's Blueprint. Such stalwart champions of gender equality. I'm glad to have met with the new NOW president, Christian Nunez, and am thrilled about her leadership. The future for women looks so bright, and you are such an important part of making it so. Thank you for your work, Carol Jenkins. The ERA Coalition has been an invaluable partner in our work to ratify. And Delegate Halia Aya, we all have you to thank for your incredible work getting the ERA ratified in Virginia last year. Thank you, thank you. And I'm thrilled to see Belle Ann here from Generation Ratify. Can't believe you co-founded your organization when you were just 15 years old. Your generation gives me hope. As we know, the ERA was first written exactly 100 years ago in 1921 by Alice Paul, Crystal Eastman, and others. We are a century out from its creation. Tonight, in celebration of Women's History Month, I want to honor women, specifically women of color, who have fought for the Equal Rights Amendment. Along the way, been there side by side with us. One incredible ERA pioneer was Mary Church Terrell, daughter of formerly enslaved parents. Mary Church Terrell became a suffragist and racial equality activist. Her words, quote, "lifting as we climb," end quote, became the motto of the National Association of Colored Women, a group she helped found in 1896. After ratification of the 19th Amendment, Mary continued to fight for universal suffrage, something other white suffrage leaders did not. Mary Church Terrell also supported the quote, next step, end quote, of prominent suffrage leaders, the Equal Rights Amendment in the 1940s. She wrote a speech entitled, quote, Why We Need the Equal Rights Amendment, end quote, chastising some of her colleagues for opposing it. Another phenomenal pioneer and ERA advocate was Pauli Murray. Pauli was a lawyer and civil rights activist. In 1966, Pauli and a few others convened in Betty Friedan's hotel room in Washington, D.C., and launched the National Organization for Women, making Pauli one of the original co-founders of NOW. Ruth Bader Ginsburg credited Pauli's work as the inspiration for her 1971 brief in Reed v. Reed, the first major Supreme Court case that addressed discrimination based on gender. The decision ruled that gender-based discrimination was unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Pauli, too, was a supporter of the Equal Rights Amendment. In fact, Pauli testified at a 1970 Senate hearing in support of the ERA, saying, quote, I suggest that what the opponents of the amendment must fear is not equal rights, but equal power and responsibility, end quote. Another powerful advocate was Representative Barbara Jordan. She was the first ever Southern Black woman elected to the House of Representatives. In 1978, she testified in support of the ERA deadline extension and said, quote, the Equal Rights Amendment is for men and women. It is a constructive force for liberating the minds of men, and the place of women is inclusive, end quote. And of course, today we have women of color still leading the way on the ERA. In Nevada in 2017, Senators Pat Spearman and Yana Cancela led the way, ratifying the ERA for the first time in decades. And I got to tell you, I supported her for the House of Representatives. And I wish that Pat Spearman was with me in Congress now. She's such a fighter, but she's with us in spirit. Juliana Stratton, who is now Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, helped get it ratified there in 2018. And Hala Ayala, member of Virginia's House of Delegates, who is with us here tonight, along with Jennifer McClellan and Jennifer Carroll Foy, helped get it ratified just last year in Virginia. And I joined them for a bus ride through Virginia, and Jennifer has joined me in Washington lobbying for the ERA. We have all of these incredible women of color throughout history who have fought to get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. And here we are now, 100 years later, and we are almost there. We are fulfilling their dreams, aspirations, and hard work. What an amazing legacy to be a part of. I think one of the reasons women of color have long been on the forefront of the fight for the ERA is that you are acutely aware of the consequences of inequality, and you know that nothing less than constitutional equality for all genders will suffice. We have Equal Pay Day coming up on March 24th. But we know that Black women's Equal Pay Day isn't until August 3rd, and Native women's Equal Pay Day isn't even until September 8th. Women of color have long been paying the price for inequality in this country, quite literally. We must ratify the ERA and get it into the Constitution so that once and for all, we can definitely state gender equality is an American value. Thank you all so much for the work you do. Thank you to NOW for keeping the torch burning for the ERA all these years. Thank you for the younger generation for joining us in this fight. The only way to spell fundamental equality in the Constitution is ERA. Thank you, and I yield back, and join us next week. Wear white, we're going to the floor, and we are going to pass the extension bill, send it to the Senate where they will pass it, send it to the president's desk, and it will be ratified. Then we know the opposition will sue and we will be in the courts, but we will keep fighting. We will never give up until women are in the Constitution. Now, I've been in Congress a long time, and our rights should not be dependent on who's in the White House, who's the president, who's the head of the Senate, who's on the Supreme Court. And when we were fighting to keep Kavanaugh off the Supreme Court, I was so distressed. And then I thought, Supreme Court justices come and go. What is steady, what is there, what is fundamental is the Constitution. Our energy, our fight should be to get in that sacred document so that our rights are not at the whim of whoever is in power, but they are concrete, in stone, enshrined, and protecting us. Now I have to end with something very important. I have followed many Supreme Court cases on sexual violence when the evidence was clear the woman was raped repeatedly with many witnesses. I've watched the Supreme Court in discrimination cases, and they don't support us. They throw it out on a technicality. Our rights are not a technicality. And equal pay for equal work, which is so fundamental, will never be there for us unless we can enforce it. And that means we must be there together, holding hands, embracing each other in the Constitution. Your fight is the most important fight that any of us can do. And I will never give up until we are in the Constitution together, protecting each other. And I see my good friend, the glorious Carol Jenkins, thank the ERA Coalition. And now you have inspired me my whole career. Thank you now so much. And Tiffany, I look forward to getting to know you better. That was a beautiful introduction, and we're going to celebrate together when we finally get it ratified. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman, for coming to speak to us and for being a committed champion for women. I'm going to wear white next week, even though I won't be there with you. I will be there with you in spirit. I will take photos. I'm going to encourage everybody. You are so inspiring, as is everyone on this panel. And we are just so excited to have everyone join us tonight for our fourth listening and discussion session. I am thrilled that Black Women's Blueprint and Now have joined together to embark on this series. The bold advances that women have made over the past decades, some of which Congresswoman Maloney talked about, particularly those of our Black, Indigenous women of color, Latinx, trans, and gender nonconforming relatives, have come under threat of regressing under the Trump administration these past 4 years. Yet, these communities have been healing for centuries from oppression and are no longer willing to be ignored or silenced.
Biden-Harris administration has committed to uplift our much-needed diverse voices, but we know there is so much that needs to be done to truly make a difference in our lives and the lives of the women we serve. This is why, beginning with the first 100 days of the new administration and continuing throughout 2021, we are bringing these voices to the forefront so we can share our perspectives and experiences, highlighting how we have been personally impacted and what issues matter most to us. In 2021, gender equality is still not the law of the land. Nearly 100 years since Alice Paul introduced the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923, the Constitution does not entirely prohibit discrimination based on sex. While we celebrate the many achievements we've made since then, we know our work is not yet done. Women were deliberately left out of the US Constitution, and women of color have been left out of the discourse for equality for centuries. We're hoping to start to change that tonight. And with that, I'm really pleased to turn it back to Tiffany to introduce some of our panelists for this evening's conversation. Oh, you're muted.
I am excited. I'm about to introduce the first panelist, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen to introduce our other panelists. Belaine Yeshigeta is a co-founder and executive director of the national youth-led organization, Generation Ratify. Generation Ratify is dedicated to ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment, advancing gender equality legislation across the country, and giving young people the tools they need to become more effective advocates and organizers. Although still in high school, which means I have a lot more work to do, Belaine is committed to using her voice and resources to continue this work and move towards a better future for all. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen to introduce our last two panelists.
Delegate Hala Ayala is a lifelong Virginian who was elected to the House of Delegates in 2017 and currently represents the 51st District, which covers parts of Prince William County. She was president of the Prince William County National Organization for Women, appointed by Terry McAuliffe to serve on the Women's Advisory Council. And in 2017, she helped organize Virginia's attendance at the first Women's March in Washington. As a delegate, Hala has worked to pass some of Virginia's most important pieces of legislation, like expanding Medicaid for 400,000 Virginians, raising teacher pay, passing the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment in 2020, and expanding background checks to keep guns out of dangerous hands. And then last is Carol Jenkins, President and CEO of the ERA Coalition and Fund for Women's Equality, sister organizations dedicated to the adoption of the Equal Rights Amendment. Previously, Carol Jenkins was founding president of the Women's Media Center, a national nonprofit organization created to increase coverage and participation of women in media. As a pioneering African-American television reporter, Jenkins was an anchor and correspondent for WNBC TV in New York for nearly 25 years. Ms. Jenkins is also an author, a three-time New York Emmy-nominated host of Black America on CUNY TV, the executive producer, writer, and documentary correspondent of an award-winning film, a podcast host, and co-anchor of the CUNY TV's live election night coverage. Thank you all for being here. Tiffany, let's dive right in.
Hey, my first question is for Carol. As was said earlier by the Congresswoman specifically, the ERA is almost 100 years old. And a poll done in 2016 found that 80% of those polled mistakenly believed that men and women are already guaranteed equal rights in the U.S. Constitution. Can you talk a little bit more about how Congresswoman Maloney started off about why are we still pushing for this? Why is the ERA still important? And specifically, what will it do for women in the U.S. right now, particularly Black, Indigenous women of color?
Yeah, I do want to say thank you to NOW and to the Black Women's Blueprint and all who have joined us today, and Hala and Belaine. I'm thrilled to be talking with you today. I love Chairwoman Maloney. I hate following her because she can give those stem winders and she's just fabulous. I mean, you should know that she was one of the founders of the ERA Coalition. We're 6.5, 7 years old now. She and Jessica Newworth, a human rights lawyer, got together and decided that there was not a focal point for all of those who were interested in pursuing the ERA. I know that many people thought that it was dead and gone and over, as people consistently continue to say, even as recently as last week. But we're here to say that the Equal Rights Amendment is alive and well. The coalition is made up of over 120 organizations across the country. We work in Congress, in the courts, in the states. We're thrilled to be with Hala Ayala in Virginia as they gave us the 38th state. We're talking about a really big thing. Amending the Constitution is not an easy endeavor. Article 5 says that it requires two things: passage of Congress by 2/3, and that happened in 1972 for us, and then ratification by 38 states. We didn't get that 38th state until last year, exactly January 27th. I count that day, in my heart as a date that we should all remember. So we've met those two requirements, but one of the things that happened in crafting and getting it passed in Congress in 1972 was that in the introduction of it was listed another, wrinkle that we are still dealing with today, and that was a time limit. we used to call it the deadline, but at the coalition, we say they really didn't mean it as a deadline. They thought of it, it was a suggestion, 7 years, and then we got it extended to 10 years. And we still did not have, after those 10 years, the 38 states that we needed. We stopped at 35. And a huge gap from 1972 to 2017, as Chairwoman Maloney has pointed out, when Pat Spearman in Nevada got Nevada to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And we were sitting in our office, a real office then. We haven't been in a real office in so long, our virtual offices now. But in a real office, we were looking at each other when we heard the news, and we said, does that matter? Does that count? And we checked with our lawyers, and our lawyers told us, yes, indeed, it does count. The next year, Illinois, with Juliana Stratton in the leadership, ratified the ERA, and then Virginia, of course, last year. Again, pointing out that it was Hala Ayala and two other Black women who were in the front of that, Jennifer McClellan in the Senate and Jennifer Carroll Foy in the House of Representatives. So we've met the requirements stipulated in Article 5 in the Constitution, but now what we're trying to do 100 years later, after it was first introduced, created by Alice Paul, is to do away with the time limit. Now, last year, the House of Representatives, we had a huge celebration. The House of Representatives on February 13th dissolved the time limit. And I want to make clear that what we're doing in these resolutions is not extending the time, we're eliminating it, killing it, meaning that we're done here and the ERA is in full force. We passed it in the House, and then, like so many hundreds of other really good ideas got buried in the Senate, did not come up for even a moment's conversation. We were told, sorry, that's not going to work here. But of course, what we know now is that we have a new administration, we have a new Senate, we have a new Department of Justice, and we need all three of those things to consider moving forward with the Equal Rights Amendment. I just want to say, and I want to hear what others have to say, but why we need it now. In so many of our conversations and our issues, our marches, our demonstrations, we've been talking about systemic racism and systemic sexism. And if you're looking for the root of it, it lies in the Constitution. That's where it is incorporated. And if you're asking why it hasn't changed in all of these years, no matter how many efforts are placed to get women equal pay, protection against sexual violence, we've done everything else except change the playbook that dictates how we live our lives. And until we do that, we will not be able to cure these intractable problems of poverty. Most of the impoverished in this country are women. Most of those assaulted, victims of assault, most of us victims of office discrimination as well. So that's why we're working to eliminate the timeline, to finally get the Equal Rights Amendment. And then later we'll talk about, this was the easy part. Now we have to talk about putting it in place, the implementation of going through every statute in every state in the federal government and looking and reviewing them. And one of our partners has done that for Arizona. They looked at all of the statutes that need to be changed because of the ERA. That report is 650 pages long. So we're talking about substantial work still ahead. Back as Chairwoman Maloney would say, I yield my time back.
Well, thank you, Carol. This next question is for Belaine. One way we know the ERA is still relevant is that so many young people like you are fighting for it. Thank you. Tell us, why did you found Generation Ratify, and why is the ERA so important to you and other people your age?
Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and be representing Generation Ratify, and just getting into the origins of founding Generation Ratify. I'll be very honest. Up until getting involved within the ERA movement, I was not familiar with equal rights movement. I believe that many people within my generation, my age group, my demographic, honestly didn't even know the ERA existed. And I think that was one of the key factors into leading me to, you know, wanting to become a leader in the movement and wanting to be engaged and also engage other people. So we kind of get to really get into the origins of it. Like I said, lots of people do not know the ERA is, and what really happens. One of our co-founders, Rosie, had actually been like perusing some of the proposed legislation in our state assembly, and I'll be very honest, that's not a very common activity that people our age do. So one of the things is definitely there was a lack of accessibility there, but from being friends with her, from knowing her, and both having that shared passion for activism along with our other co-founders, we realized that this is something that we really needed to be involved in, not just because the ERA is so timely and important to just our generation in regards to just achieving gender equality, but because we lived in Virginia. All of our co-founders are Virginians and live in Northern Virginia, and that we were at the cusp of finally getting the ERA ratified. So obviously very important, and like so many people before me have said, Virginia did ratify last year in January. It was an incredible day. January 27th will be remembered forever. But that was one of the again driving factors of founding Generation Ratify. Like I said, it is not a very common activity to, you know, be perusing legislation, to be looking into some policies that don't really get spoken about anymore. And that was another important factor, was that it wasn't accessible. No one knew about it. It wasn't talked about. A lot of us, you know, take AP Gov, take you know, civics classes, and it's not even really mentioned in those places. And if it is, it's more of a footnote than anything else. And that's really disappointing, considering it's so monumental and important, and something that's going to have such a lasting effect. Something, you know, with the longevity of an amendment, a constitutional amendment, should be spoken about in every conversation we have until it's ratified. And again, 50% of our population, and then obviously looking at people who are beyond binary, people who are transgender, people who are part of the LGBTQ community, looking specifically at what it does for, you know, people of color and BIPOC individuals. The ERA is very relevant today. Now, again, why it's important for youth to be involved is because we are going to have to carry the conversation forward. We're going to be carrying the movement forward. We have so many incredible movement leaders who have been part of this fight for so long, but it's essential for people of our age, of our next generation, to continue these conversations and continue to move it forward, or it will genuinely die. And we can't let that happen. And we are so close now to getting ratified. Now is definitely the time for more people of any demographic, of any age, to really get involved and be part of this fight and really finally get that the ERA in the Constitution. And then, like, again, I believe Carol Jenkins just said right before me, it's not just about getting it into the Constitution. There's so much work that has to be done after. And still, there need to be people here to carry that moving forward and carry that torch. So it is essential for young people to be involved. It's essential for us to be aware of the Equal Rights Amendment, and again, to look at not only what it does for women, but for what it does to LGBTQ individuals, people who are beyond binary, and looking truly at all the different applications of the ERA.
Thank you so much. I do have a question real quick. When it comes to Generation Ratify, are they in all states? Are they concentrated somewhere? How do we get that started?
Yeah, so initially when we began, we had planned to be more of a state organization. But again, we were kind of coming into the movement right when Virginia, like I said, was you know, getting ready to ratify. How we did a lot of work for the for the state legislature elections, like right before the ratification. But after that happened, we realized that, of course, this is more of a national fight now, and we immediately went up and we're like, okay, we need to look at this at a federal level, and that allowed us to expand again nationally. So I believe we are present in nearly every contiguous state in the United States, and then we have over about 60 chapters, I will say, of local organizers that organize both at the state, federal, and local level. So after the ratification of the ERA, in Virginia, of course, we began to look at more gender equality legislation as a whole as well, because we did have people who were willing to take these fights to their local school boards, local county boards, state governments, etc. So yes, we are again national. We're in most states, I believe now. We do have about, I believe, 5,000, 6,000 members now. And yeah, that's Generation Ratify.
Love it.
They are amazing. And they're also members of the coalition. I always say they're so much smarter than any of the rest of us. And they put our feet to the fire all the time. We get, rapid fire emails for them. Wait just a minute. What's going on? Do this, do that. So we love them.
I love that energy. We all need it. The infamous Delegate Hala, your name's been mentioned like throughout this whole conversation, because you were a major advocate for the ratification of the ERA in the Virginia State Legislature, that is, as it's been mentioned. Can you talk about what that process was like? How did you convince your colleagues to vote for ratification and the obstacles? Because we know that you encountered some obstacles in doing this.
Well, one of the things I can celebrate is being a now sister in this space. And I'm sorry about my dog. He wants to be part of this conversation. He is, for gender equity and equality. So we got to celebrate that. He's a little spicy. So I just want to apologize. Coming from grassroots, and I'm so excited to see Belen and seeing women before, me advocate for this issue for decades, right? This is not something that was happening overnight. And, being a part of this movement, you didn't see Black and brown faces at the forefront of the feminist movement for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I remember talking with Carol and Ellie Schmiel and so many of these formidable, historic women who are fighting longer than I have for the Equal Rights Amendment. You can do it, coaching us along. It was very scary, because we ran for office in 2017 after the election of Trump, who was against gender equality, everything that we were talking about here today on this panel. And I gave up a job. I was $68 in the bank, 1 month away from bankruptcy. And I was fighting because I wanted to go to the State House to make Virginia the 38th state to ratify the ERA. Like, that is bizarre. What's your campaign goal? Ratify the ERA, pass Medicaid expansion, repeat, replay. And this is because Black and brown people, haven't seen representation in our body here in this 401-year legislature talk about the ERA as passionately as we did in the last couple of years. This is not to say, let me not not mention my colleagues, the women, the Black women that were in the House always voted to support it. They carried it. But because we gained the majority, we were able to amplify it and build this momentum. And so it became a campaign before the campaign began, right? We traveled in a bus, and Carol and so many of you on this panel today were a part of this journey. This was a year in the making. So many grassroots activists and collaborated. And I have to say, Miss Dr. Dent, you can't do this alone. This is a village. This is women and men uplifting us so that we can make this possible. So this journey was not mine alone. So I want to mention that because I think it's important that even though our names may be on the piece of legislation, all of your names are on that too. So I stand on the shoulders of my sisters, my ancestors, to say thank you for making this day possible, because women have not had a seat at the table. We've been on the menu for decades. And in the 401 year of this legislative body, the oldest legislative body, and 42 years later, as many times as this legislative piece of legislation has came up, and men have carried this in the General Assembly and in the State Senate, we couldn't get it to passage. We were always either so close or convincing our counterparts. But when Democrats came in, we took the majority. We put equity back in our state constitution. We removed barriers, and we passed the Equal Rights Amendment. And I can remember that day. I looked at Carol. I looked at the now president, Ellie, who was sicker than a dog that day, Alice Cohan, so many of the women that were fighting for this, the Deltas, who have not been on the forefront or mentioned as they should. We amplified Black and brown women as part of this movement, because this wasn't one without the other. This was a collaboration. And on that day, we saw synergy, we saw energy, we saw celebration, we saw tears, we saw women making history, because we're not behaved very well, as you can see as my Zoom, we're not very well behaved. But to convince my colleagues, this was a no-brainer for them. We talked about the importance of intersectionality of the ERA and why this is important to be stressed in our Constitution, and why women need to have a voice. We may have been the engines that drove this and the forefront in our names being on the legislation. But we have our first African-American majority leader who is every bit a part of this, who helped us whip these votes together. In the 401 year of this body, we have our first Jewish American woman leading our House. Women were on the forefront, whether you liked it or not. And that if you were not on the boat, you were going to get left behind. And we were tenacious. We were passionate. We were saying, hell no, we won't go. And we kicked tail. We passed it. And I think I gasped. I said, I was in shock. And Delegate Carol Foy says, Hala, are you breathing? Breathe, breathe. And I think I screamed because the work in my advocacy years, feeling the energy of my ancestors and the women that were with me that day who were not alive to see this very moment, to the women that uplifted me so that I could have a seat at this table and pass legislation like this, it gives me goosies. You will never forget that day that two women from Prince William County, along with all of you, you were part of this conversation, helped change the United States Constitution. And so with that, I'm proud, I'm honored, not only to celebrate my journey with you, but what you've done for me. Women like Tubman, Ida B. Wells, like Alice Paul, Katie Stanton, like all of these women, Thurgood Marshall. We were walking in the halls of some of those individuals that day, and this oldest body, where Washington, Madison never envisioned women or equality for women. And we brought it. The screams in that room was just out of pure joy. Black, brown, white, AAPI, the whole gamut of women from all walks of life and men said yes. And it was the proudest political moment, one of many in my life. And I can't stress the impact that this is going to have that I may not even live to see. But because you all pushed, y'all changed Title IX. It was women in the room with these lawmakers, the president, and influencers that this is possible. So your work, National Organization for Women, and all of these advocacy groups are so important to pushing the conversations forward and making that change. It doesn't necessarily have to be historic. In this case, it was, but it's change that is going to be felt for decades, and we can't go back. We have a Democratic president, Joe Biden, who's going to hopefully move the envelope this Women's History Month and solidify the decades of work of all of you. So with that, it wasn't hard to convince, and I know this was long, but I don't want to leave this moment. If you haven't seen the articles, if you haven't seen the impact, there will be equity for Black and brown women in our criminal justice system or our justice system. We will have strict scrutiny when we have been treated there was indifference in our criminal justice system, or cases against violence, equal pay for equal work, paid family medical leave. All of this is possible because of the work of some of you who may have died helping us get the vote, who suffered, who have been beaten, who may have been hurt just to get to this very moment in 2020 and now in 2021. So I just don't want to make that moment pass without the gravity of the history, the civil rights movement, the people that died for our right to vote, and then where we are today. So I would like to take all the credit, and I appreciate you referencing me, but we can't leave those women and those voices behind, because they shook the table, they changed the game, and now we will be in the Constitution.
Thank you so much, Delegate Ayala.
I don't know, did we just hear from the future Lieutenant Governor of the state of Virginia? Sounds like that's the, and you know, the women who from the Senate and the House of Delegates are both running for governor, and Hala is running for Lieutenant Governor. So that's what the Equal Rights Amendment will do for, empowerment. Sorry.
Well, moving on actually to kind of, next steps. One of the bills in the House, House Journal Resolution 17, which is the one co-sponsored by Congresswoman Maloney, would eliminate the deadline for ratification of the ERA, which is the most direct path to finally getting the ERA approved and into the Constitution. But Congresswoman Maloney and Congressman Reed recently announced the introduction of another bill, HJ Resolution 28, which would restart the amendment ratification process. Can one of you explain what the purpose of the second bill is? And I'm sorry, this question is for any of the three of you, but can you explain what the purpose of the second bill is, and what do you think the second ratification process would look like if it comes to that?
Well, probably another 100 years. Hopefully not. Chairwoman Maloney has introduced her bill for 14 years. She was always our hero. Before anybody recently was excited and enthusiastic about the Equal Rights Amendment, she was. And she has new language, and it is essentially a start over bill. We support that. As a coalition, we support all ways to the Equal Rights Amendment. We have a very large tent. We try to support what everyone is thinking about the way, to get it. So people always ask us, when they see how complicated the 100-year-old amendment is, why don't you start over? And we always say we absolutely can, and we will if we have to. We're ready for it. We always support Chairwoman Maloney's amendment, but we would like to see the one that we've been working on, that, as Hala, talks about the millions of people, who have been working through the years to see this put into effect. We cannot abandon it. We're going to see it to its conclusion. And as the chairwoman pointed out, even when the deadline is lifted, the ERA has a long life in the courts, probably all the way to the Supreme Court, but we're willing to do that fight, and we're willing to start over. But I would say you cannot tell me that you would, at this particular juncture, being so close, the only thing we know the House is going to pass it. We need the Senate to do it. That, you want us to drop that, and we will if we have to. But I think that we need to follow this to its natural conclusion. And we will. Just imagine getting 2/3 of this Congress to agree on anything. Just imagine sending an amendment out across the United States and needing 38 states. And that's what starting over means. You start over from the very, very beginning. So I think that will be for Belaine and, the generation ratify, should we not succeed, but I have every confidence that we will. So we're moving forward, with this, but all praises to anybody who says, I want equality for everyone in this country. The amendment doesn't say, let's put women in the Constitution, but that's the effect of it. It simply says you cannot discriminate based on sex. And that's good for everybody in America. And for crying out loud, we say, what is it? Why does America so devalue its women that it puts us in this constant begging position? Please give us our equality. We've got to fight. It's time to put this particular conversation to rest and to, instill the fundamental constitutional equality of all people in this country.
Before moving on to the next question, Hala or Belaine, would you like to respond to that at all?
I think that Carolyn really encapsulated what the goal is here. We want equality now. We don't want to, I support Congresswoman Maloney, but I don't want to start over. We have fought for decades for this, and I'm confident, as she has stated, that we will get this across the finish line. We've waited so long for equity, and we shouldn't have, or equality, we should not have to wait any longer. All of our the blood, sweat, and tears. We can't guarantee that every legislature is going to remain blue as it is today, or some of them today, that will get the numbers needed. So that is my only angst. It took Virginia 26 years to gain the majority. And we have made progress every day since then. And it has just been a whirlwind. There are so many horrific policies that have been enacted against our LGBTQ community, against women, that have marginalized us, and all these policies that I kind of grimace a little bit, but I know that this is in good hands on Capitol Hill. We have a president. I remember Governor Northam signing this, and our first woman speaker to send it up to the governor's desk, Governor Northam's desk, to talk about. He celebrated this. His wife celebrated this, and Attorney General Mark Herring got in his car. He hand drove it to Washington, D.C. the day we ratified it. So I can tell you, we have so many allies, but our legislatures are not promised. And, we have to be, let's get this done in 2021, right? This is the year. I thought last year was 2020 perfect vision. We won't talk about what happened. It was a whole, besides the ERA, there's a whole other thing happening in this world. But now we're on good footing. We're on the path to healing. Let's put women in the Constitution. So President Biden, if you're hearing this today, we're sending out smoke signals, ERA signals, good vibes, good juju. Help women, put us in the Constitution. Yes, we can.
Okay, we do have one more question for all three of you, and then we do want to move on to a few questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask for this next question, if you can kind of keep your answers brief. So the impact of the ERA is not just that it will give equal rights to all, but it will also impact many other fights that women take to Congress. Can one of you give an overview of other legislation or policies that will help shore up to enable us to achieve racial and gender equality? For example, Roe v. Wade, equal pay, etc. And then also, if you could leave with, what can the activists watching at home do to help?
Well, go ahead, Blaine.
Sure, I'll take this quick.
Next generation.
Yeah, I can just run through some of the things that we are focusing on right now. Something that we're very dedicated to is making sure that when we're looking at policies, when we're looking at initiatives, we want to make sure that we're being very intersectional in our approach, looking at how will this affect Black women, how this will affect transgender people. And I'll just kind of list the three that we're looking at right now. I know the Equality Act just passed the House, I believe maybe last week. It's hard to keep track of time now, but I believe that was last week. We're looking at the Marital Equity Act, and we're also looking at the Black Maternal Health Bill. So again, looking at specific legislation that's going to be very targeted and looking at different intersections. We especially want to make sure that we're applying the ERA towards LGBTQ folks, so we're definitely looking at that. And then also more generally, I think there are so many intersections between gender equality and other issues, whether it be criminal justice, whether it be education reform, which I guess would kind of be touched on with the Marital Equity Act. Whether it be climate change, the Green New Deal is a feminist issue, whether people acknowledge it or not. So looking at very specific and intersectional legislation and making sure that people are aware that the ERA can apply to almost anything, because gender equality is such a universal issue. In regards to what people can do, Generation Ratify is a youth-led movement. So one of the things that we, as just being mostly made up of youth organizers, is definitely something we need is just donation support, whether it be fiscal and actually getting money, or whether it's just talking about Generation Ratify, talking about it in your social media, talking about it when you're in these rooms at these tables, and making sure that we're able to keep young people as a part of the movement and keep their voices heard. And then in addition, just outside of Generation Ratified, talking about the Equal Rights Amendment, I can't stress that enough. People will really just not know what it is unless you tell them about it. And thankfully, with all that's happening with Virginia's ratification, with the court cases, with our more progressive government as of now, we are having more conversations around it. But it won't be enough until the ERA is in the Constitution. So any chance you get talking about the ERA, bringing it up, having these conversations, making sure that people spread the word, and getting that people powered up into Congress.
Yeah, and I would just add, for us to pay attention to what's going on with the voting rights bills, the voter suppression in, I think it's 43 states, over 250, laws and bills that have been put into place or attempted to be put into place to keep people from voting. And as Hala pointed out, the only reason we have the ERA in the 38th state is that voters, pro-equality voters, were able to take over the state house. Otherwise, we would still be sitting here looking for the 38th state and not at all be as close as, as we are. So the president has issued an executive order, on voting rights. There's H1, H4, which is the John Lewis bill, and to think about the filibuster. It's an awkward thing to bring up because it's a Senate rule, but as I heard Congressman Jim Clyburn say this morning, I will not have my rights filibustered out, so I think that we have to look at changing Jim Crow practices, that prevent us from getting the things that we want, and that's in the Senate. We would need 60 votes because of the filibuster or the threat of it. And so I think we all need to pay really close attention to what's going on in terms of who's allowed to vote, and what we need to do to change the way our Senate runs. It's a very archaic, unfair, minority ruled setup.
To all of that.
Thank you all. We have gotten the opportunity to ask you questions, but I'm sure our audience would love to engage with this panel of awesome women. We will now answer a couple of questions from the Q&A box. Kathleen, do you want to ask, or I can ask one?
Oh, sure. I'm going to jump to the one just to bring it kind of to the international level. Are any of you aware of the connection between ERA and the CEDAW ratification? And do you know how, passage of, finally getting the ERA implemented, is that going to affect, CEDAW is the Constitution on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is the international treaty that the United States and I think only 6 other countries have not signed on to. So can any of you address that at all?
Hala has an answer, but I'll just say it's a double scandal.
Right. I will just say that Virginia has passed I carried the first resolution for CEDAW to establish this mechanism in the House. So this year I gave a speech on the floor against violence against women and why this is needed for us to adopt and why this is impacted, especially disproportionately, Black and Brown communities, women especially, and the things and the steps that we need to do. And given the sake of time, I won't dive too much in it, but I think states can start passing resolutions and starting to build momentum, asking and calling your congressman and senator, like, this is a necessity. We should not be this far behind. But yet, if you watch the movie Misrepresentation, the United States has yet to have a female president when 80 other countries or states have had either a female prime minister or president residing over their country or state. And so this is imperative that we not only have representation, but the legislative teeth behind it. So I'll yield my time to Carol Jenkins.
No, I think it's, it stands, 100 years of trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment, all of these years and trying to join in, what seems to be a sensible, fair, we have to start looking at this fabric. People always say, we're better than this, and I say, until I see otherwise, I say there's something drastically wrong about the mindset of America. And, we just cannot, continue. I mean, we really now have to put our foot down and say, that's enough of that. Women have been the cheap labor in corporate America. We made this country very rich, by working for less than men. It's just, I want a big sign that says, okay, that's enough, stop. Let's just move on with equality.
Great.
So, I know that you guys have been, I know that Belaine actually mentioned donations and stuff for the support for Generation Ratify and to keep it in the conversation. What are other ways that people can get involved at their local level?
Well, I think that as we've learned, whoever is sitting in the chair that controls a committee, has the ultimate power. America, as we know from all of the polling, is ready for equality. They support the Equal Rights Amendment, by 80, 90, 99%, depending upon which poll and which group, but no one, hardly, there is not a poll that suggests, that America is not ready for it. But you have these small, like in the Senate, that will hold us up, a group of legislators who do not believe in it, even though, their constituents may. It was the same thing in Virginia. Holly, you can talk about it, where for years it was the control of the committee to bring the vote to the floor that held up the ERA. We always knew that if it got to the floor, it would pass. But getting to the floor, was the issue. Holly?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Like I said earlier, and I spoke a lot of words early in my introduction and just conversating about the ERA, that, we've had women, Black women and men introduce this piece of legislation, the Equal Rights Amendment, to the floor for years, right? This has been a constant, advocacy for this particular issue for all the right reasons, but we've not had control for so many years of our state bodies, right? It was up to the states to sign and have 38 states just to ratify the Constitution. It's this is what you have to do. When we're looking at the Senate and we're talking about all of these things that they do, like filibuster and hold legislation up, as you saw with the care package that would recently pass. These are the tools that they use. So representation matters. That's what I'm getting at, and that you need to continue your activism. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and democracy means that we are fighting for the pieces of legislation that we care about. So we have to get off the sidelines, grab our sneakers, grab our marching shoes, or whatever you refer to them, our clipboards, and get down to Capitol Hill or have virtual meetings. And it can't stop once November comes, right? This is constant engaging and massaging. So you can start petitions, work with other collaborations. There's power in numbers, but yet we've seen so many advocates. And if I'm looking at an example, the Equal Rights Amendment, how long it took, we will always have people stymie these processes or be obstacles. So it's important about representation. It's important to vote. And, Virginia this year became the 38th, became the first Southern state to adopt their own Voting Rights Act. So this matters. Diversity and intersectionality and voices matter. So your vote does matter. We saw that with the election of Trump, and we now see that with the election of Joe Biden. We can't stop there. Our fight doesn't end.
Right. And please go to our website at eracoalition.org, where we've got a petition that we've sent out to the White House asking for 100 days action. We now have tasks for the House vote next week and for the Senate vote coming up, tools that you can use. We also have a way for you to, with our maps and our elect equality tools, you can reach your representatives and tell them that you want the ERA in the House and then in the Senate. And please reach out to us, and we would love to engage. If you're an organization and want to join the coalition, we would welcome you. We have, we're setting up plans. We now have a 5-year plan of implementation, and we hope to have 500 organizations. So please, come join us in this work. It's not over when we get the ERA.
Absolutely. And one more plug, join National Organization for Women. Join National Organization for Women. Yeah. If we have somebody that can put that website for membership, that changed my life. You sisters got me elected. So join National Organization for Women. We're 500,000 women strong, and we're not staying home.
Great. And thank you. And I don't want to cut you off, but we are at 5:02. So thank you so much. I just want to kind of sum up in summary, just say we still have to watch House HJ Resolution 17 and make sure that that passes the House and passes the Senate. And as Carol referenced, the filibuster. So we need to work on that as well. So thank you. And I'll turn it over to Tiffany for our final words.
Thank you. This has been amazing. I want to thank our awesome panelists for taking the time to speak with us today and for offering us ways to get involved to ensure women gain equality in the Constitution, that playbook that was talked about. We hope these conversations are generative and will propel us all to action. Please be on the lookout for more information about our upcoming event in the series, Economic Justice. We are not percentages of a dollar, solutions for equal pay every day on March 25th. Thank you all for joining us and have a great night.